I like to think of this as being us being on the brink of stage 2 of the sustainable energy revolution. So the first part of that revolution was affordable solar panels. Solar panels have become a commodity. They fell in price by about 80% between about 2008 2013 and have been on a gradual price decline ever since. And we're now on the brink of a combination of ways of storing energy. A lot of that's got to do with batteries, but there are other forms of storage, and also ways of slicing and dicing energy. So smart control systems, smart grids, smart homes, etc., that will allow us to generate, store, and then make decisions about when we use, sell, buy, etc., renewable energy and otherwise. We are moving into an era when mains electricity will be generated by solar, wind, tidal and thermal energy. Homes will be all electric. I would argue that the mains gas network that has exploded probably in the 1990s and early 2000s will go into decline. People will no longer want it. They will no longer need it. I can even imagine a day when people who particularly like cooking with gas will actually have mains gas passing by their house, and they will choose not to connect to it and will have a bottle of LPG because it's more cost effective. So I think the sustainable and economically compelling house of the future will be all electric. There will be no mains gas. Solar power with battery storage will be normal. The majority of homes will have it. Solar hot water or heat pump hot water services will be normal on homes. The mains electricity grid will become a backup system for homes. In our region, probably 6 to 8 months of the year, I can imagine homes having no net import of electricity from the mains grid. So they will either effectively import nothing, or they will in fact export more electricity than they use. The one thing that may change that is the electric car. So if you look at household usage alone, we are well and truly on the brink of houses more or less not needing the mains grid for 2/3 of the year. Electric cars will of course create greater demand. Although people may in fact be charging them at their workplace, so when you go to the factory or the office, part of your salary package, if you have a job, because an artificial intelligence or a robot hasn't put you out of a job, if you have a job at an office or a factory, plugging in your electric vehicle at the office will be part of your salary package, and you may have very little need to charge your car at home. For 3 to 4 months of the year in our region, we don't have enough of a solar resource to get enough energy off the average suburban roof to power everything we need in our homes, so we will rely on the mains grid. The mains grid may in fact disappear though in regions remote from population centres, because the regulated monopoly that we have, where a privately owned owner of the poles, wires and meters does a deal with the state government to agree to what they charge. I suspect that deal will start to be less attractive when you have population centres cross-subsidising regional areas as you do now, but then you start to make not very much money in the population centres because people don't really need you for 2 months of the year. It gets harder and harder to cross-subsidise the mains grid half an hour out of town, and I can imagine proposals to shut the mains grid down may occur. So where we have a mains grid, both the mains grid and homes will be smarter, and there will be on-site options to generate, store, buy and sell power to and from the grid and renewable sources of generation and storage, and there will be automation systems that do a lot of this for us. So, we all own homes, and perhaps we'd like to know how our household energy budget might fit into this vision of the future. As I've stated, I think mains gas is going to go into decline. Energy will be the cheap fuel, if you like, because you're going to be able to generate it on site with increasingly affordable solar panels. It will also be the flexible fuel, if you like. Fuel in inverted commas for the engineers and physicists. It will be the flexible fuel because not only can you generate it, but you will be able to store it in batteries that are stationary, that is to say they are built into your house, but also in your electric car. So there may be some sort of movement of energy in and out of the electric car during the day as a form of storage. So unlike mains gas, you will be able to exchange electricity, you'll be able to sell it directly during the day as your solar panels are generating it, you'll be able to put it into a battery and sell it back to the grid from a battery. There are markets developing for that. You will be able to charge your battery overnight off peak when power is cheap. That is something that people are already doing. So they may have a solar power system with batteries. They may have a small battery set that allows them to shift some power from the middle of the day through that evening, dinner time, just reaching bedtime period. By the morning, their battery is basically exhausted. The sun isn't yet up, but they can charge off peak in the wee hours so that they've got some cheap power to use 6, 7, 8 in the morning before the sun's fully up. Electricity is flexible because basically we'll be able to make decisions about where we source it and when we use it. Between about 2008 2013, the price of a solar panel fell about 80%. It fell off a cliff, sort of did a roller coaster ride, and then stabilised and has been on a gentle decline ever since. Batteries, we've probably fallen off the cliff. We don't quite know how fast we're falling or how far we're going to fall, but we've started falling. So increasingly affordable and becoming affordable at an accelerating rate. Houses are getting smarter. There are smart devices everywhere. The solar power equipment that we supply has data loggers and inverters that are increasingly smart. We have smart meters, and all these things have been designed to talk to each other. Batteries are exciting, but they're only one way of storing energy. So batteries are a very flexible form of energy storage because if we put electricity into a battery from a solar panel, give or take some inefficiencies, some charging and discharging inefficiencies, we can basically recover all of that energy. But batteries are still quite expensive. There are other ways that we can store energy right now that are not as flexible. That is to say, we can't recover the energy, but they cost quite a lot less. So if you have a solar power system running during the day and your feed-in tariff is not particularly attractive, that is to say you've got excess solar but the price you would get selling it back to the grid is not particularly good, you will have needs for energy in the evening. So you don't mind whether your hot water was charged overnight off peak or whether it was charged from solar the previous day, you're storing that energy you need as heat in a tank. Obviously we can't recover that heat. We haven't got temperatures right now that are not as flexible. That is to say, we can't recover the energy, but they cost quite a lot less. So if you have a solar power system running during the day and your feed-in tariff is not particularly attractive, that is to say you've got excess solar, but the price you would get selling it back to the grid is not particularly good, you will have needs for energy in the evening. So we need hot water. You might have a shower in the morning. You don't mind whether your hot water was charged overnight off peak or whether it was charged from solar the previous day. You're storing that energy you need as heat in a tank. Obviously we can't recover that heat. We haven't got temperatures and equipment that allows us to recover energy from hot water services at a domestic scale, but we can certainly store that energy. So one thing that we can do right now that's much cheaper than an electrochemical battery is storing solar energy in a hot water tank. So traditionally that was done with roof-mounted solar hot water collectors that converted light into heat. Increasingly it's being done with heat pumps. So heat pumps, as I said, are basically air conditioners. They're basically reverse cycle air conditioners that absorb heat in one place, release it in another, and that other place is a tank of hot water. So they're absorbing heat from the ambient air, putting into a tank of hot water. Increasingly, that's a more economic and flexible way of heating hot water. If you were to invest in an evacuated tube solar hot water service, very effective, but once you've invested in that equipment to convert light into heat, you're only going to get hot water out of it. If you've got a solar electricity panel, you're producing electricity, you can make a choice as to whether you were to switch on your heat pump hot water service to use that electricity during the day from solar or perhaps overnight off peak, you can't make that choice with evacuated tubes. We come up with tailored solutions for people, so evacuated tubes definitely have their place, but as I say, increasingly heat pumps are a more flexible way of doing it. We can also dump solar generation to electric elements as well, which can be appropriate for some people. The other sort of air conditioners that we know as air conditioners are air conditioners. So, as I said, increasingly, people obviously cool homes with air conditioners, but they will increasingly heat their homes with air conditioners as well. Those air conditioners are basically absorbing heat outside and releasing it into your room when they're on heating mode. If you had a solar power system that was generating power in the middle of the day, and you had a not particularly attractive feed-in tariff, so let's say you were buying energy at 30 cents and you were selling it back to the grid at 10 cents, if you were to allow all that power from your solar power system to go back to the grid at 10 cents during the day, you come home from work, it's a stinking hot day, around about 6 p.m, it's summer, you've still got a couple of hours of sunlight left, you turn the air conditioner on, you run it for a couple of hours, or you run it for 4 hours, right? So 4 of those hours running the air conditioner, 2 of them the sun's there, maybe only a limited amount of sun because we're heading into the evening, 2 of those hours absolutely no sun. So you'll be pulling a significant amount of electricity off the mains grid at your peak rate of 30 cents when you could have used solar. You can't afford a battery to store it, but what you could have done is put your air conditioner on a timer to get it to run, say, from 2 p.m, something like that. Get your 4 hours done, say, between 1 and 5 or 2 and 6, so that when you come home, the house has been pre-cooled and you've used solar energy to do it. And if you have a solar power system and you use that solar power, it will be your cheapest form of electricity and you've avoided that mains import. So the same thing works with heating or cooling if you've got enough of the solar resource. There is a industry jargon for that, of course, which is preheating and pre-cooling. Yes. The other thing that you can do, particularly in off-grid systems, is where you have gravity pressure or atmospheric pressure hot water services, you can turn a pump on when you have solar resource available to pump to a header tank. So you wouldn't want to, in an off-grid power system, charge a battery during the day. You'll cycle the battery, you'll tend to shorten its life by using it, and then you turn on a pump in the middle of the night. Wouldn't make sense. Your batteries are probably charged by mid-morning in an off-grid power system for the sunniest 6 months of the year, and once your batteries are fully charged, you can have some sensing equipment that knows that and switches on the circuit to run a pump to a header tank if required. So what I'm trying to show there is examples of using the timing of demand, if you like, in order to get the best value out of your solar power system. So the industry jargon for that is energy management or demand management. We need to make decisions about when we use energy, and so we need some information, and that information can be of varying degrees of sophistication and detail. All of the solar inverters that we sell these days have data loggers built in. So just an inverter basically converts DC to AC. So if people are wondering what is an inverter and why do we need one, your solar panels on the roof produce what is called DC. Our mains grid and all of our appliances that are designed for the mains grid run on what's called AC, 230 or 240 volts AC, and we need to convert from DC to AC. That's what an inverter does. That's why every solar power system that's grid connected has an inverter. So built into those inverters are data loggers that record the amount of solar generation. Those data loggers are network connected so that we can monitor systems remotely and give people advice about what they might be doing with the energy. We can see, for example, if a tree has grown and is starting to shade the panels later in the afternoon, and we would see that as a drop-off in generation, and we might work out what that is. And the action that might be taken there is to give the tree a haircut. The other action might be to simply accept that there is less solar generation available at that time of day and to try and manage our demand not to use power so much at that time. So solar inverters tend to have data loggers built in that show solar generation. Some systems also will show generation, will also show what you're consuming. Generally speaking, that is an additional optional extra. So if you were to install a smart meter or an import-export meter in your switchboard that's connected to your inverter, it will sense what's flowing out of the property, that's your excess solar generation, what's flowing into the property, and that will allow you to know what you're consuming on site. Very often, that import-export meter that you need with the battery system is the same one that you can put on the solar inverter simply for the purposes of seeing your consumption as well as your generation. So some people might choose to put on a solar inverter with the additional import-export meter to gather data that will allow them to make a decision about when they charge a battery. So we can make decisions about when to use energy. Those decisions could be as simple as, I've got a bad feed-in tariff or a low feed-in tariff. I'm selling at 10 cents, but when I import, I'm importing at 30. I'm going to switch on my washing machine during the day or my dishwasher because I'd rather run it on the solar power than pay 30 cents to run it. That's a real simple, right? That doesn't require too much electronics. You can do that with what are called delay buttons. So a lot of washing machines and dishwashers have delay buttons. They originally came along because people who were going to go to bed might start their washing machine with a delay so that they might go to bed at 9 and then it would start at, say, 11 when off-peak starts. So you'd put a delay of 2 hours. And also use timers to get things to run during the day. So, for example, the heat pump hot water services that we supply and install have timers built in, no additional cost. We just run it on a timer starting typically around about 10 a.m. so that the running of the heat pump hot water service starts and then passes through that peak of generation in the middle of the day. So that is very effective. As long as you have a solar power system of at least 3 kilowatts, you are better off running your generally speaking, you're better off running your heat pump during the day using solar power than you would be to run it overnight off peak. Should you buy a heat pump hot water service with a timer in it? If you were running it off peak, you later purchased a solar power system, you can just reset the timer. So simple, not particularly clever, just runs at the same time all day, but actually effective from a sustainability and economic benefit point of view. We can get smarter. So some of the inverters that we're involved with will actually switch on a circuit with something that uses power based on the amount of power that they are producing. So to give you an example, I've been working with someone who's got an irrigation pump. Well, it's not an irrigation, it's a pump that supplies a tank that then feeds stock troughs. So that pump is basically almost the only thing that is running in the shed, and it's the only thing that's running on that mains connection. So what we know is that when, if that pump runs, it's really going to be the only thing using power in that shed. So we can switch that pump on when the solar power system is producing at least 1.5 kilowatts of power. It's a 1.5 kilowatt pump. Actually, what we'd probably do is switch it on when it was around about 2, just to give us a little bit of a buffer, because we don't want to be turning it on and off. So if we do that, we are restricting the runtime of that pump to times during the day when there is a lot of solar resource available, rather than letting stock drink from the troughs and basically activate the refilling of the tank all the way up. It's a very large tank that's got 2 days of water in it for the stock, so there's no reason that we need to top it up in a hurry. As long as we top it up enough during each 24-hour cycle, we can restrict the runtime of the pump to that period in the middle of the day, maybe about 6 hours from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. And we can do that based on a signal, which is simply how much solar energy is being produced. We could try and get smarter. So the other thing that we can do with that inverter, if we put that import-export meter in, we can make a decision to switch the pump on based on how much power is being exported back to the grid. Because if we're exporting it and we're only getting 10 cents, we might rather switch on something to use that power and essentially, effectively value that at our peak rate of 30 cents. In the case of the shed, there's nothing else basically in the shed. So we know if we've got enough solar energy to run the pump, we can safely just switch the pump on, and there'll be nothing else that will draw extra power off the mains grid. On the other hand, if it was a workshop as well as a shed, there might be all sorts of loads starting up, and we might actually want to invest in that extra smarts, that is the import-export meter and the cost to set up circuits to switch between that, etc., etc. And there's a little bit of a trade-off between the degree to which you invest in smarts and the degree to which you just use brute force. So another approach we could take with this pump is to just put it on a timer running during the day between 9 and 6, and that's it. And rather than even bother to switch it on and off when the sun is shining, just assume that the sun will be shining enough to give us enough power, and rather than invest in any smarts, use brute force and stick another kilowatt of panels up on the roof. So different approaches can be the most economic approach depending on the pattern of use. So we've talked about what we might want to do and how we might do it. The question then becomes, what should we do? Well, obviously from a sustainability point of view, we should use more renewable energy. So your tariff to import mains electricity might be a flat rate, that is to say you always pay 25 cents. It might be what's called time of use, where you have a peak and an off-peak. Your peak period will be 7 in the morning till 11 at night, Monday to Friday. Overnight is off-peak, weekends are off-peak. That tariff structure was kind of set up so that people could run electric hot water services during that off-peak period. So previously you used to have a dedicated circuit for that hot water service at a lower rate. With the introduction of the current smart meters, the way that has been approached is to simply say, well, at this time, this is what all energy costs, but we'll run the things that we want to run overnight at that overnight time when power is cheap. Hence, it's called time of use. There is another pricing structure called flexible pricing. It is my understanding that almost nobody has it. It's not very attractive. There is a peak, shoulder and off-peak. So whereas your flat rate might be 25 cents, your peak and off-peak might be 30 cents peak, 15 cents off-peak. Flexible pricing, you might have 10 cents off-peak, 20 cents shoulder, but your peak might be 40 cents plus. And that peak in a domestic home is when in fact you want to use power, which is the late afternoon and the early evenings. So for most people, it doesn't work out as a very attractive option. Historically speaking, there have been subsidised feed-in tariff rates for solar. So in the very early days, people received 60 cents plus. That was a deliberately subsidised rate. We have seen a multitude of schemes over the last 10 or 12 years that I've been doing this. We've gone from 60 cents plus, and it's been stepped down to a sort of round about 30 cents, which was round about 1 for 1. So you'd be sort of buying at 25.30 and you'd be selling at 25.30. Over the last 5 years, we've had a system that has been based on a deemed fair market price. So this is Victorian government legislation, and basically the idea is that each year, based on a formula, which is mainly to do with the price of wholesale electricity, but other factors, a floor price is set by the Victorian government. So over the past 5 years, that price has been about 8 cents, 6 cents, 5 cents, can't remember, but last year up until the 1st of July this year it was 11.3 cents. As of the 1st of July it was 9.9 cents, call it 10 cents. So that is a deemed fair market price. It's a guaranteed price for your solar export that's set by the Victorian government. What this has meant is that for most people who are on a flat rate or time of use during the day with a peak rate, you're buying it between 25 and 30 cents during the day. That's when the sun's shining. So what you would much rather do, rather than sell your solar electricity at 10 cents, you'd rather use it. Because if you're using it, you're avoiding a use that might cost you 30 cents peak rate, or it might cost you 15 cents off peak. So for example, running a hot water service during the day, you're effectively using your solar rather than paying 15 cents per kilowatt hour overnight. For the first time in nearly 10 years, the Victorian government's actually got what you might call what appears to be a deliberate subsidy. They've come up with an option to have either that fixed rate, which is 9.9, effectively 10 cents at all times, but now they've got a variable rate, which is a peak, shoulder and off peak for what you export back to the grid. And unlike the importing, it's actually very attractive to take up this flexible export tariff. So your off-peak period, which is basically overnight when nobody's going to be exporting anything, or the very early morning, we're talking 7 cents for anything that goes back out to the grid. Your shoulder period, which is basically 7 in the morning till 3 p.m. Monday to Friday, and then 7 till 10 p.m. on the weekends, you're looking at 10 cents, which is the equivalent of your flat rate. But the interesting and exciting bit of it is that between 3 p.m. and 9 p.m. Monday to Friday, you will actually receive 29 cents per kilowatt hour for solar energy that flows back to the grid. So this is, I mentioned data loggers. We can see the sun coming up in the morning, peaking in the middle of the day and declining as the sun goes down in the afternoon. This is the solar generation curve for a site that's either had shade in the afternoon or perhaps cloud, but that's what you would get with a solar data logger that's built into basically all Grid Connect inverters these days. If you were to put on an import-export meter, you would get additional information. This black line, the black line is basically the demand. That's how much is being consumed. Obviously, in the middle of the night, it's entirely coming off the mains grid, there's no solar. This is our solar generation curve. Anything below the black line is coloured grey, and that's what's been used on site. Anything above the black line is being exported back to the mains grid. And that green stuff could be used to charge a battery, run a heat pump hot water service, pre-cool your house, etc., depending on what makes sense, depending on what feed-in tariff you're getting. This is a generation curve from a different inverter manufacturer. Above the line, we've got blue, which is your solar generation. Below the line, we've got orange, which is the consumption. I don't know if people can see this, but we've got a dark blue and a light blue, and a dark orange and a light orange. So the sum of the dark blue and the light blue is your total solar generation. The dark blue has gone back to the grid. It's being exported during the day because nobody's home. The light blue section has been used on site. And you'll see that the light blue bars are the same size as this little light orange section here. So at night you can see dark orange. Dark orange is import from the grid. Demand that's been supplied by the grid. Light orange, which I don't know if people can see in this light. Yes, no? Good, thank you. The light orange is demand that's been supplied by the solar power. Does anyone have any idea what that might be? That's around about 10 a.m. And if you were to look at this data set, you would see this every single day, that little block there. So that's a heat pump hot water service. And what you can see here, that's basically heating the household's energy. This would be probably I think it's a 4 or 5 kilowatt solar power system. Basically for 6 months of the year, that water is going to be by the solar. And for a significant portion of, say, 8 to 9 months of the year. This is the same premises. Again, same colours. This is in the middle of winter rather than the middle of summer. What we can see there is that there's less solar generation. We can still see that little block of demand, but we can see that about 2/3 of it is light orange. That's come from the solar. And about 1/3 of it is dark orange. It's come from the grid. So on this day in winter, we've got about 2/3 of our hot water from solar, running the heat pump using the solar energy. but we had to import a little bit off the mains grid. This one is from a domestic home. We can see somebody's got up and had breakfast and gone to work. They've come home and started doing everything that people do at home. We can then see that we've got a sort of jagged looking curve. We know it was a cloudy day, so the amount of solar generation has been chopped, if you like. We don't have that nice smooth bell curve. But what's a bit odd about this is during the middle of the day when there's no one there, we've got all these little spikes. The black line, which is your consumption line, spikes up, and underneath that line, we've got demand that's being met by the solar generation. It's actually based on the amount of export. So every time we're exporting a certain amount of power, we say, well, we'll switch the hot water service circuit on, and if the thermostat then says, oh, well, I need to heat the water, then it will switch the element on and we draw some power. This one is that pump I was talking about, the pump with the stock trough. So this is the initial proposition where ultimately we'll probably back this pump up with batteries. At this stage we're not, we're just trying to run it on the solar. You can see at the bottom of this graph we've got some red-brown lines. That is the demand for the running of the pump based on what the stock's doing, drinking water and causing the tank to be refilled. So that's obviously happening whenever the animals are awake, and they appear to be awake up until about 9 p.m. at night from about 5 in the morning. Obviously no solar resource at that time. If we were to just put a solar power system on without any smarts, I've estimated that we might save about, so we put a 3.5 kilowatt solar power system on, the customer might save about $300 used on site, exporting at a flat rate another $340 of savings. During the sunny part of the year when this pump is running, we know when we're going to be producing round about 1.5 kilowatts, that's when the pump will come on. We now go up to about $380 worth of savings, a bit less export, but we've gone up to $660 of savings overall. If we were to then put that customer on the variable rate feeding tariff rather than the fixed rate, and you can if you think about it, we don't want that pump to run, say, after 3 p.m, and we can be fairly confident in this instance that it won't, because we won't be generating more than 1.5 kilowatts. So we'll just let that power go back to the grid after 3 p.m. when it's worth 29 cents, and our savings overall increase to $776. Not going to change your life, but it always fascinates me how you can make a decision at one time, whether it's designing a house with the insulation and the placement of the windows, or how you configure a solar power system, and it just sets up for a more or less economic proposition.